She pressed both hands flat against the wooden door and begged. Not quietly, not with pride. She begged the way a woman begs when the alternative is dying in the street, loud enough that the people inside could hear every crack in her voice, every desperate exhale, every shred of dignity peeling away like old paint from a burning barn. "Please," Evelyn Carter said. "I am not asking for money. I am not asking for sympathy. I am asking for work. Just work. I will scrub your floors. I will clean your storeroom. I will do anything you need. Please." The door opened exactly 2 inches. One eye looked at her through the gap. Then the door closed again, and the bolt slid home. That was the 7th door. In one afternoon. In a town she had never wronged. If this story moves something inside you, if you have ever been judged for something you did not do, if you have ever been left standing in the cold while the world kept walking, please subscribe to this channel right now and follow Evelyn's story all the way to the end. Leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Every comment, every name, every city, it means the world to me. Now let us begin. The summer of 1884 did not feel like summer to Evelyn Carter. It felt like punishment. She had been walking since before the sun came up. Her worn leather boots scraping against the dry Montana road. Each step a small argument between her exhausted body and her stubborn will. Her suitcase, the one her mother had owned before her, had a broken latch, and she held it shut with her left hand the entire time she walked because letting it fall open felt like one more thing she could not afford to lose. She had 23 cents. She had a photograph of her mother tucked inside the front pocket of her dress, the edges soft and worn from being touched too many times by fingers that missed her. She had a name, and the name was the problem. Red Hollow was a small frontier town, pressed between 2 low hills in the Montana mountain range, the kind of place where everyone knew everything, and most of what they knew was wrong. It had a general store, a boarding house, a small restaurant, a church, a blacksmith, and a saloon. The full inventory of a frontier settlement that had survived long enough to develop opinions about the people who passed through it. Evelyn arrived just before noon when the heat was at its worst, and the dust from the main road coated everything in a pale yellow film. She straightened her back before she entered the town. She smoothed her dress with her free hand. She made sure her face was composed. She was 31 years old, and she had been called many things in the past several months. Distant, manipulative, unstable, dangerous, and she had learned that the first impression she made was the only weapon she had left. If she looked frightened, people assumed the worst. If she looked confident, they at least had to work harder to dismiss her. She walked into the general store first. A man in his 50s stood behind the wooden counter, spectacles low on his nose, writing something in a ledger. He looked up when the bell above the door rang. "Morning," Evelyn said. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I've recently come to town and I'm looking for work. I have experience with bookkeeping, inventory management, cleaning, and general labor. I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly." The man's expression did not change for a full 3 seconds. Then something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of recognition, the kind that never meant anything good. "Carter," he said slowly. "You related to the bookkeeper who worked for Hale Mining over in Denton." Evelyn kept her voice even. "I am that bookkeeper." The pencil stopped moving. "I heard you stole from them," he said. "I did not steal from them. I was falsely accused." "That's what they all say." "I imagine it is," Evelyn said. "But in my case it happens to be true. I discovered that money was being moved without authorization, and when I reported it, the owner chose to blame me rather than investigate." The man set his pencil down on the counter and leaned back in his chair. "Ma'am," he said, and the word had no respect in it, "I run a respectable business. I can't have someone with your kind of reputation handling my inventory or sitting near my cash box. I'm not asking you to trust me with your cash box. I'm asking you to let me sweep your floors." The answer is no. She stood there for one more moment, not pleading, just standing, letting him see the full weight of what he was doing, and then she picked up her suitcase and walked back out into the heat. The boarding house was next. The woman who ran it was named Mrs. Howell, and she was the kind of woman who had built her entire identity around knowing what was proper and what was not. She had white hair pinned severely behind her head, and she wore an expression of permanent mild disapproval, the way some people carry an umbrella, even when there is no cloud in the sky. She listened to Evelyn's request with her hands folded in front of her apron, and her eyes moving slowly up and down, taking inventory of everything from Evelyn's boots to the broken latch on her suitcase. "I've heard of you," Mrs. Howell said. "I expect you have," Evelyn said. "I'd like the chance to show you that what you've heard isn't accurate." "I run a house for decent women," Mrs. Howell said. "Women who are building respectable lives. I can't have someone here who carries controversy." "I carry nothing but a suitcase," Evelyn said, "and a willingness to work." "The answer is no, dear." That dear was the worst part. Evelyn had noticed that the people who were cruelest to her always said it the softest, as if the gentleness of the word could cover the sharpness of the thing beneath it. She went to the restaurant. She went to the church office. She went to the blacksmith and asked if he needed someone to manage his accounts. She went to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town and asked if they needed a teacher's assistant. No, 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 no. By the sixth rejection, Evelyn had stopped explaining herself. The explanation did not help. The explanation gave people something to argue with, gave them permission to debate the details, gave them the satisfaction of hearing her justify herself before they said no anyway. So she stopped. She simply stated what she needed and waited for the answer she already knew was coming. The seventh door was the boarding house's side entrance. She had gone around to ask if they needed kitchen help, someone who would not interact with the guests, someone invisible. The eye through the gap. The bolt sliding home. She stood on the porch for a moment staring at the door. She did not cry. She had made herself a promise 3 weeks ago when she was still in Denton, when Victor Hale had stood in front of half the town and described her as a woman of dishonest character and loose morals, and she had felt the humiliation of it burning through her chest like a swallowed coal. She had made herself a promise. Then the people who were trying to destroy her would not get her tears. They did not deserve them. Tears were something she saved for the people she loved. And these people, these strangers who believed a powerful man's lies because it was easier than thinking these people were nothing to her. She walked to the water trough at the edge of the main road and sat down on the wooden edge of it. She set her suitcase between her feet. She reached into her left coat pocket and took out the last piece of bread she had been saving since morning dry. A little hard at the edges, the kind of bread you ate out of necessity rather than hunger, and she held it in both hands and looked at it. 23 cents. 1 piece of bread. No job. No room. The sun was dropping behind the western hills, and the temperature was already beginning to fall the way Montana temperatures did, fast and without warning, as if the cold had been waiting all day just outside the door. In a few hours, it would be genuinely dangerous to be outside without shelter. She ate the bread slowly, and she thought. She was not the kind of woman who panicked. She had discovered this about herself in the last several months, that when things became their worst, some quiet part of her became very still and very clear, like a mountain lake going flat just before a storm. She could feel the fear. She was not numb to it, but the fear did not run her. She had watched too many women lose everything because they let the fear run them. She needed a plan. She was trying to build one from almost nothing when she heard the slow scrape of boots on the road behind her and turned to see an elderly man making his way toward the water trough with the deliberate pace of someone whose body had decided to renegotiate its agreement with speed. Howe was in his late 60s, with a face the color and texture of old saddle leather, white hair under a battered hat, and eyes that were still sharp in a way his body no longer was. He carried a wooden bucket in one hand, and he looked at her the way very old people sometimes looked at younger people in distress, not with pity, but with the particular patience of someone who had lived long enough to know that most disasters were not permanent. "Water troughs for horses mostly," he said, stopping a few feet away. "But I don't suppose you're here for the water." "I'm not," Evelyn said. He set his bucket down and lowered himself onto the edge of the trough a few feet away from her, moving with the careful deliberateness of old joints that demanded respect. "You look like a woman who's had a long day," he said. "I've had a long several months," she said. Today was just today. He nodded slowly. He had the manner of a man who was not in any hurry to make a point, and in Evelyn's current condition, she found that she did not mind. After a full day of doors slamming and eyes hardening and voices going flat and cold, there was something almost startling about the simple lack of hostility in this man's face. "Samuel Reed," he said, extending a weathered hand. "Evelyn Carter." He shook her hand without hesitating. Without that half-second pause, she had come to recognize the one where people weighed the risk of touching her, as if dishonesty were something that transferred through skin. "I know who you are," he said. "Then you know what they're saying about me." "I know what Victor Hale is saying about you," he said. "Which is a different thing entirely. I knew your father, Miss Carter. Joseph Carter was one of the most decent men I ever met, and I spent 40 years in this territory, meeting all kinds." Something in Evelyn's chest moved, something she had been holding very tightly for a very long time. She pressed it back down. "My father was a good man," she said. "He would have been ashamed of what's happened. Not ashamed of me, ashamed of the people who did this." "He would have," Samuel agreed. "What are you doing here in Red Hollow?" "Trying to find work. So far, the town has made its opinion of me very clear." "Red Hollow is small and easily frightened," Samuel said. "Victor Hale's influence reaches farther than it should, because people here can't afford to make enemies of powerful men." "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm not angry at them." She paused. "That's not entirely true. I'm a little angry at them, but I understand it." Samuel was quiet for a moment, staring out at the road. "There's a man," he said finally. "Lives up in the mountains north of here. About 3 hours by trail. His name is Caleb Walker. He owns about 400 acres up there, cattle, some timber, the only property in that range that's still in private hands." "What about him?" "He lives alone, has for years. He's not an easy man, doesn't talk much, doesn't trust easily, and he's had enough bad experience with hired help to make him suspicious of everyone who comes looking for work." Samuel turned to look at her. "But he's also not a man who cares about gossip. He cares about what he can see with his own eyes." "You think he'd give me a chance?" "I think he'd listen to you," Samuel said. "Whether he gives you a chance depends on you." He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small folded piece of paper. "That's the trail marker. Follow the north road out of town until you see the split pine. You can't miss it. It was struck by lightning 5 years ago, and it's still standing, just split right down the middle. Take the left fork and follow it up. His ranch house is at the top." Evelyn took the paper. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Samuel picked up his bucket and stood with the effort of a man who did this kind of thing through sheer stubbornness. "Because your father helped me once when he had nothing to gain from it," he said. "And because you're sitting by a water trough in the dark with 20 cents in your pocket and a broken suitcase, and that seems like a situation a decent person ought to do something about." He walked away. Evelyn looked at the piece of paper in her hand. 3 hours up a mountain trail. Alone. In the dark if she waited until morning. Or before sunrise if she left now. She stood up. She picked up her suitcase. She left. The trail was exactly as difficult as 3 hours up a Montana mountain in the pre-dawn hours promised to be. The left fork past the split pine climbed steadily through stands of pine and lodgepole. The path narrow and uneven, the darkness broken only by the cold blue-white light of a half-moon that appeared and disappeared behind moving clouds. Evelyn had to stop twice to shift her suitcase from one hand to the other, and once she missed a root in the dark and went down hard on one knee, tearing the hem of her dress and scraping her palm against the rocky ground. She stood back up. She kept moving. She thought about her mother, who had raised her alone after her father died when Evelyn was 12, who had scrubbed other people's laundry and taken in sewing and done whatever needed doing without ever once suggesting that this was a humiliation. "You do what needs doing," her mother used to say. "You don't wait for the world to decide you're worthy of surviving." By the time the sky behind her began to lighten from black to the deep gray that came before real dawn, Evelyn could smell wood smoke. And then she could see it. A ranch house, solid and low-built, from the kind of timber that took years to properly season, with a long porch across the front, and a barn to the left, and fencing that stretched out in both directions as far as she could see. There were cattle in the near field, maybe 30 of them. Dark shapes in the gray light, and the whole place had the look of something that had been built by someone who expected it to last. The door of the ranch house opened before she reached the porch. A man stepped out. He was taller than she had expected, and broad through the shoulders with dark hair that touched his collar, and a beard that was several weeks past a trim. He was wearing a work shirt with the sleeves already rolled up, despite the early hour, and a pair of boots that had seen considerable use. His age was somewhere in the middle 30s, though the outdoor life had added something to it. He stood on the porch and watched her walk up the path toward him, and he did not move and did not say anything until she was about 10 feet away. Then, "Who are you?" "Evelyn Carter. I'm looking for Caleb Walker." "You found him." His voice was low and flat, the voice of a man who did not add unnecessary warmth to his words. "Who sent you up here at this hour?" "A man named Samuel Reed." Something moved in his expression, not warmth exactly, but a slight recalibration. "Samuel," he said. "All right." "I'm looking for work," Evelyn said. She made herself hold his gaze because she had learned that looking away was something people read as guilt. "I have bookkeeping experience, and I can manage records and accounts. I can also do physical labor, fencing, cleaning, whatever you need. I'm a hard worker." He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes moved down to her boots, which she had not realized were still visibly wet from the morning dew on the trail grass, and then back up to her face, where she was sure the exhaustion of a sleepless night and 3 hours of mountain trail was perfectly evident, and then briefly to her left hand, where she was holding the suitcase shut. "Broken latch," she said before he could ask. "I can see that." He was still watching her. "You walked up from Red Hollow?" "Yes." "In the dark. It started to get light around an hour ago." "What happened in Red Hollow?" "They didn't want me there." "Why not?" Evelyn set the suitcase down at her feet. She was tired. She was cold. Her knee was scraped under her dress, and her hand still stung from the fall, and she had been awake for the better part of 20 hours. She was done with the careful version of this explanation. "I worked as a bookkeeper for Victor Hale's mining company in Denton," she said. "I found discrepancies in the account's money moving in ways it shouldn't be. I reported it. Instead of investigating, Mr. Hale decided it was cheaper and easier to make the problem me. He spread the word that I was a thief. He had enough influence that people believed him. I lost my job. I was asked to leave my lodging. I couldn't find work anywhere in Denton, and I spent the last 3 weeks trying to get here to Red Hollow, where I was hoping the situation might be different." She stopped. It was not different. Caleb Walker had not moved through any of this. His arms were folded across his chest, and his expression was the expression of someone who was listening carefully and drawing no conclusions yet. "So they ran you out of 2 towns, he said. "One town, Red Hollow, just declined to help. You walk up a mountain in the dark based on what one old man told you. Samuel Reed knew my father. He's the only person in the last 3 months who didn't look at me like I was carrying something contagious." "What did your father do?" "He was a surveyor. He died when I was 12. Caleb unfolded his arms. "What kind of discrepancies?" he asked. "In the accounts." Evelyn blinked. It was not the question she had expected. "Payroll entries that didn't match the worker rolls. Supply costs billed twice with different vendors. About $2,000 over 18 months moved in small amounts, so it wouldn't be obvious." "And Hale blamed you for it." "He said I had been skimming from the payroll, which was easy to say because I was the one who managed the payroll." "But you weren't." "No." "How do I know that?" Evelyn looked at him steadily. "You don't. Not yet. That's what you'd be taking on faith if you hired me, the possibility that I'm telling the truth. I understand if that's too much to ask." Caleb was quiet for a moment. A cattle dog had appeared from somewhere around the side of the barn, a blue heeler, compact and serious looking, and it padded up the porch steps and sat next to Caleb's boot, looking at Evelyn with the same focused attention its owner was giving her. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. "I told you, Evelyn Carter." "I heard you the first time. I'm asking what I should call you." She almost smiled. "Evelyn is fine." He nodded once. He looked out at the fields for a moment, then back at her. "I've got 240 head of cattle," he said, "and I manage them alone. I've got records that haven't been properly organized in 2 years because the last man I hired to help with them left in March without finishing the job. I've got fencing on the north perimeter that needs work, and I've got a supply shipment coming from Billings in 2 weeks that someone needs to be here to receive and log." Evelyn waited. "I pay $8 a month," he said, "plus a room and meals. You'd be expected to work 6 days, and you'd have Sundays." "I'll take it." "I haven't said yes yet." "No," she said, "but you just described the job." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. The kind of movement that suggested he had not found many things worth smiling about recently, but that this had come closer than most. "You can sleep in the room off the kitchen," he said. "It's small. It has a window." "That's fine. My dog sleeps where she wants. Don't try to move her." Evelyn looked at the blue heeler who was still watching her with complete professional detachment. "I wouldn't dream of it. I start work at first light. If you're not up, I start without you." "I've been up since before first light," Evelyn said. "I think we can establish that I know how to be up." This time the shadow in his expression was slightly more pronounced. He stepped back from the porch railing and held the door open. "Come inside," Caleb Walker said. "I'll put on coffee." Evelyn Carter picked up her broken-latched suitcase and walked up the steps and through the door, and the blue heeler stood and followed her inside, without being told, which she would later come to understand was a significant event in the history of that mountain. The kitchen was large and functional, a wide wooden table, a cast-iron stove, shelves of orderly supplies. 2 windows that looked out toward the eastern pasture, where the sky was just beginning to show its first real color. It smelled like wood smoke and coffee grounds, and something that might have been pine pitch, the kind of smell that meant a place had been lived in by someone who was serious about it. Caleb moved to the stove without looking at her and began building the fire up for the coffee. Evelyn set her suitcase down beside the door and stood at the edge of the room taking it in. "The records," she said. "Where are they?" He glanced back over his shoulder. "In the study." "Why?" "I'd like to see them." "You haven't slept." "I'd still like to see them." He looked at her for a long moment, with the same measuring expression he'd been wearing since she walked up the path. Then he jerked his chin toward the hallway. "Second door on the left," he said. She found the study a room with a single window, a large wooden desk, and 3 shelves of ledgers and loose papers that were organized in the way that someone organized things when they ran out of time and patience simultaneously. She stood in front of the shelves for a moment, reading the dates on the ledger spines. 2 years of accounts. 6 months of what appeared to be worker records. A year and a half of supply invoices in no particular order. She put her hand on the oldest letter and pulled it out. She was already working before the coffee was ready, and when Caleb appeared in the doorway a few minutes later with 2 cups and found her sitting at his desk with the ledger open in front of her and a piece of paper beside it with 3 columns of figures already started. He stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything. Then he set 1 cup on the edge of the desk where she could reach it. "You don't have to start today," he said. "I know," she said without looking up. "I want to." He was quiet. "You've got a discrepancy in your supply costs from October of '82, she said. "Something was billed twice." Another silence. "I know," he said. "I never found where it went." "I'll find it." He stood there a moment longer. Then he picked up his own cup and left her to it, and the blue heeler who had followed him into the doorway turned around and went back and lay down under the desk near Evelyn's feet. And that was how the first morning began on the Walker Ranch, with coffee and ledgers, and the particular quiet of 2 people who had both learned to live without being trusted, discovering that trust was something that could begin very small with numbers on a page and a dog deciding to stay. Evelyn worked until the light through the window was full and bright, and then she set down her pencil and stretched her hands and looked at what she had found. The discrepancy from October 1882 was a supply invoice that had been entered twice, once under hardware and once under general supplies, totaling $14. Small enough to miss if you were managing everything alone. The kind of thing that accumulated quietly until one day you looked at your accounts and couldn't understand why the numbers didn't match the reality you were living. She stood up, picked up her coffee cup cold now, and walked back to the kitchen. Caleb was at the table with his own work, a map of the property spread out in front of him, with marks in pencil on the northern perimeter. $14, she said. October of '82. Thompson Hardware filed the same invoice under 2 different categories. It was a billing error on their end, not yours. He looked up. You found that in 2 hours. It wasn't hidden, it was just buried. She set her cup on the counter. Do you want me to write up a correction entry? He studied her for a moment. Yes, he said. She went back to the study. She was halfway through the correction entry when she heard him in the hallway, and then he appeared in the doorway again. There's something you should know, he said. She set down her pencil. Victor Hale has been making acquisitions in this territory, Caleb said. He's been buying up mountain property or trying to. There are 3 ranches in this range. 2 of them have already sold. Mine is the last one. His expression did not change, but something in his voice did. Something tightened. He's had men up here twice in the last month with offers. I've turned them both down. Evelyn looked at him steadily. You think there's a connection? I think Victor Hale has a habit of getting what he wants. He does, she said. He also has a habit of removing the obstacles in his way. She paused. Is that why you hired me? No, Caleb said. I hired you because my records are a disaster, and I need someone who knows what they're doing. He paused. But knowing who you are and why you're here, that doesn't make me trust you less. Evelyn looked at him. That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in 3 months, she said. He did not respond to that. He looked at the shelves of ledgers. When you finish the corrections, he said, I'll show you the property. You should know what you're working with. All right. He left. She turned back to the ledger. Outside the window, the Montana mountains rose green and enormous against a sky that was for the first time in months, the exact same shade of blue as the one she remembered from before. All of this began before Victor Hale, before the accusation, before the long, terrible slide from a life she had built with her own hands into something she had to fight just to survive. She pressed her pencil to the page. She kept working, and downstairs without either of them saying anything about it. Caleb Walker walked out to the and started his morning chores with the specific energy of a man who was not entirely sure what had just walked through his door, but who had decided quietly and without ceremony that it was probably something he ought to protect. The first week on the Walker Ranch taught Evelyn 3 things about Caleb Walker. The first was that he worked before he talked. Every morning, without exception, he was out of the house before full light, moving through the yard with the quiet efficiency of a man who had built his entire routine around the certainty that no one else was going to do it for him. He did not announce what he was doing. He did not explain his schedule. He simply moved from one task to the next with the focused economy of someone who had learned long ago that wasted motion was wasted time. The second thing was that he watched. Not in the uncomfortable way that some men watched women, not with possession or assessment in his eyes, but in the way a man watches something he is trying to understand. She would catch it sometimes when she was working at the desk, or crossing the yard to the supply shed, or talking to the cattle dog, whose name she had discovered was May. He would be doing something with his hands, mending a line, checking a fence post, and she would look up and find his eyes already on her, and he would not look away, the way most people did when they were caught. He simply held the gaze for a moment, and then went back to whatever he was doing, as if looking at her were not something he felt any need to apologize for. The third thing was that he noticed everything and said almost nothing. On the 4th morning, she came down to the kitchen with her left hand wrapped in a strip of cloth from her sewing kit. She had caught it on the edge of a nail in the supply shed, the evening before a clean, shallow cut, but enough to need covering. And Caleb looked at it once across the kitchen table, said nothing through the whole of breakfast. And when she came back from the morning's work, she found a tin of salve on the corner of the desk in the study. With no note, no explanation, nothing. She picked it up and held it for a moment. Then she put it in her pocket and went back to work. She had been through the main ledgers by the end of the first week, and what she found was not fraud, Not negligence, but the accounts of a man who was genuinely capable at everything, except the paperwork that came with running a large operation alone. There were errors throughout, not dishonest ones, just the kind that accumulated when one person was trying to track 240 head of cattle, maintain 400 acres, manage supply orders, and handle correspondence with buyers in billings, all without anyone to share the load. She found 7 billing discrepancies, 3 payroll entries that referenced workers she could find no other record of, and a full year of supply invoices that had never been cross-referenced against the actual deliveries. She laid it all out on the desk on the morning of the 7th day and went to find him. He was in the barn, working on a piece of tack with the focused attention he gave everything, and he looked up when she came in. "I've finished the initial review," she said. He set down the leather strap. "And you're not being robbed," she said. "You're just carrying too much alone. I found $41 in billing errors going back 2 years. None of them your fault. I found 3 entries I can't explain, and I'd like to ask you about them. And I found a pattern in your supply costs from billings that suggests someone there has been consistently overcharging you on hardware, not by much each time, but enough to add up." He was quiet. "How much?" he said. "Over 2 years, about $60. How was still for a moment. "Who?" "Harmon Supply. They've been billing you a freight cost that doesn't match the other vendor rates." "I'd need to compare their invoices against another billing supplier to be sure, but it looks deliberate." Caleb Walker stood up from the bale he'd been sitting on, and in that moment, something moved in his expression. Not anger exactly, but the controlled version of it. The kind that sat behind the eyes of a man who was not going to do anything hasty, but who had absolutely noted the information and filed it in a permanent place. "Write it up," he said. "I already did." He looked at her. "Of course you did," he said. It was the closest thing to a compliment she had received from him, and she recognized it as such and decided not to remark on it, because she had begun to understand that Caleb Walker's small acknowledgments carried exactly the weight he gave them, no more, no less, and that diminishing them with a response was the wrong move. She went back to the study. He followed her in 20 minutes later, which surprised her, because until that point, the study had operated as her domain by unspoken agreement. He stood in the doorway and looked at the write-up she had left on the corner of the desk, 2 pages clear and organized with the relevant figures pulled out and the comparison she had built from memory of standard billings freight rates. He picked it up and read it. She kept working and did not watch him, which was harder than it should have been. "This is good work," he said. She looked up. He was still looking at the pages. "Thank you," she said. He set the papers back down. "I want you to look at something," he said. "The north perimeter fencing. Something happened out there last week, and I want to know if what I'm thinking is right." Evelyn put down her pencil. "Show me." They rode out together, she on a gray mare named Dust, that Caleb had pointed her toward without ceremony on the 3rd day, when he'd seen her walking to the supply shed and apparently decided that was inefficient, and as they moved through the property, she saw things that had not been visible in the ledgers. The scale of it. The way the land rolled and spread in every direction, the cattle moving across it like slow dark water. The fence lines that ran to the horizon and back. It was a place that required a man's full self to manage, and the fact that Caleb had been doing it alone for years was something she understood differently, now that she could see the whole of it. The north perimeter was a 40-minute ride from the ranch house. When they got there, she understood immediately why he had wanted to show her. 3 sections of fencing were down. Not broken cut. The wire had been snipped cleanly at the post, and the cuts were fresh enough that the grass beneath the fallen sections hadn't had time to grow back. 2 of the posts were still standing, but had been partially dug out from the base, weakened enough that a few head of cattle pressing against them would bring them down entirely. Evelyn dismounted and crouched down to look at the wire ends. "When did you find this?" she asked. 3 days ago, Caleb said. He was still on his horse looking out at the fence line. "I thought at first it was weather, but weather doesn't cut wire that clean." "No," she said. "It doesn't." She stood up. "How many cattle have you lost through this section?" "I'm missing 11 head. I found 8 of them down in the valley they'd wandered. 3 I haven't found." She looked at the cut wire for another moment. "Has anything else happened?" she asked. "Anything unusual in the last few weeks?" He was quiet for just long enough that she looked back up at him. "Tell me," she said. Caleb dismounted. He walked to the nearest post, the one that had been dug out at the base, and stood looking at it with his arms at his sides. "2 weeks before you arrived," he said, "a man came up from Red Hollow. Said he was a land assessor. He wanted to walk the property." "Did you let him?" "I let him walk the public access trail. I didn't let him on the grazing land." He paused. "He pushed back on that. Said it was his legal right as an assessor to access all of the property." "Is it?" "No. And he wasn't a real assessor. Real assessors file paperwork before they come out. I checked with the county office afterward. No assessment had been filed." Evelyn stood very still. "Blackwell," she said. Caleb looked at her sharply. "What do you know about Blackwell?" he said. "Richard Blackwell. He's the man who funds Victor Hale's expansions. They've been working together for years. Hale identifies the property. Blackwell finances the acquisition. Hale handles the local politics, and Blackwell handles the money." She looked at the cut fence. "This is how they work. They don't buy what they want to take. They make it difficult to hold." Caleb said nothing. "Damaged fencing lost cattle assessors who aren't assessors. It's pressure," Evelyn said. "Designed to make a property look like it can't sustain itself. If they can document that the ranch is failing, if they can produce records showing livestock losses, property damage, financial instability, it gives them grounds to approach the county and argue that the land isn't being properly managed. And then there are legal mechanisms they can use to challenge your title. Not strong ones, but strong enough to be expensive to fight." She looked at him. "It happened to a farmer named Delacroix in Denton 2 years ago. He held on for 8 months and then ran out of money for lawyers. Hale bought the land for 1/3 of its value." Caleb was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was not surprise exactly. It was more like the expression of a man who had been thinking something and had just been told in detail that his thinking was correct. "You know a great deal about how Hale operates," he said. "I worked for him for 2 years," she said. "I know exactly how he operates." They stood on the north perimeter in the morning air. For a long moment, the horses shifting quietly behind them, the cut wire lying in the grass at their feet. "I need you to write down everything you know," Caleb said. "Everything about how Hale and Blackwell work. Every method, every pattern, everything you saw in those accounts." "I already started," she said. He looked at her. "When?" he said. "The second night I was here, when you told me about the offers they'd made on the property." She held his gaze. "I thought you might need it." Something changed in Caleb Walker's face in that moment. It was not dramatic. He was not a man given to dramatic expressions, but something shifted. Something settled like a door finding its frame after a long time of hanging slightly wrong. "All right," he said quietly. They rode back in silence, but it was a different silence than the ones before it. Something had been said between them in those words and that look on the north perimeter that neither of them could have written down, but that both of them had heard clearly. The supply delivery from Billings arrived 11 days after Evelyn came to the ranch. 2 wagons, 6 men, and a foreman named Taggart, who had the relaxed manner of someone accustomed to deliveries being received without much scrutiny. He drove the first wagon up the track from the main road and pulled up in front of the barn, and he tipped his hat at Caleb and then noticed Evelyn standing beside him with a clipboard and seemed to recalibrate something in his expression. "Afternoon," Taggart said. "Walker." "That's right," Caleb said. "This is Miss Carter. She manages my accounts." Taggart looked at Evelyn with the particular expression of a man who had been expecting something routine and had just discovered it might not be. "Ma'am," he said with a note in it that was almost but not quite respect. "I'll need to check each item against the order list before you unload," Evelyn said. She held up the clipboard. Line by line. Taggart's smile did not change, but something behind it did. "That'll take a while, ma'am." "Yes," Evelyn said pleasantly. "It will." It took an hour and 40 minutes. She found 3 items on the invoice that had not been included in the shipment. 2 bolts of fencing wire and a box of hardware that Taggart claimed must have been loaded on the second wagon. She waited while the second wagon was checked. They were not there. Those items are on the invoice and in the payment total, Evelyn said, standing in front of Taggart with her clipboard and her steady gaze. If they weren't shipped, Mr. Walker should receive a credit for the difference. If they were shipped and went missing in transit, that's a Billings problem, not a Walker problem. Taggart looked at Caleb. Caleb did not say anything. He just stood there with his arms folded, watching Evelyn work. "I'll need it in writing," Evelyn said, "before you leave." Taggart wrote it out on the back of his own copy of the invoice, a credit note for the 2 items signed and dated, and he handed it over with the forced pleasantness of a man who had just realized that this stop was going to be different from now on. After the wagons left, Caleb stood in the yard, looking at the credit note she handed him. "They've been doing this," he said. "It was not a question. At least twice in the last year based on your records," she said. "Small amounts. Easy to miss if you're doing this alone." He looked up from the note. "What made you look for it?" he said. "The pattern in the hardware costs," she said. "It's not just the freight overcharge from Harmon. The missing item trick is common in Billings, because the ranches out here don't usually have someone watching the delivery close enough to catch it." Caleb folded the credit note and put it in his shirt pocket. "You're going to cost them a great deal of money," he said. "Good," Evelyn said. He almost smiled. It was just a degree or 2 around the corners of his mouth, just the faintest movement, but she had been paying attention, and she caught it, and it landed somewhere inside her chest, in a way she noted and then filed away, because there were more important things to focus on, and she was not a woman who allowed herself to get distracted by a man's almost smile when there was work to do. The evenings were their strangest time. During the day, they operated with the clean efficiency of 2 people who were good at their work and had begun to understand each other's rhythms. But in the evenings after dinner, which they ate at the kitchen table with May lying under it between their feet, there was a different quality to the quiet. The work of the day was done, and there was nowhere to retreat to, and they sat across from each other with their coffee and their respective silences, and navigated the unfamiliar territory of 2 people who were becoming something to each other and had not yet named what that was. Caleb talked about the ranch the way other men talked about their families. Not with sentiment, never that, but with the particular attention of someone who knew every acre of a place the way you knew the back of your own hand. He would mention things in passing, that the east pasture gate needed rehinging, that one of the cattle had been limping, and he thought it was a stone bruise, that the creek level on the south edge had been dropping since June, and she had begun to realize that these were not just observations. He was telling her things, including her, letting her into the running conversation that had been happening in his head alone for a long time. She told him things too. Less than he did, and it took her longer to start. But one evening in the second week, she found herself telling him about her mother and the sewing she had taken in, and the particular sound of her mother's voice reading aloud in the evenings when Evelyn was small, and she stopped in the middle of it because she had not talked about her mother to anyone in 2 years, and was not entirely sure why she was doing it now. Caleb was looking at her across the table. "Keep going," he said quietly. She kept going. She told him about her father's death and her mother's practical grief, the way she had cried for 3 days and then gotten up and gone back to work, because there were bills and a child, and the world did not pause for loss. She told him about teaching herself bookkeeping from a textbook she'd borrowed from the church library in the town where they lived, and how she had landed the job with Hale Mining by writing the most precise application letter she could imagine and walking it to the door of the office herself, because she had no reference and no connection, and nerve was the only currency she had. "And then Hale turned it into evidence against you," Caleb said. "The precision." Evelyn looked at him. "What do you mean?" "He used your own work against you," Caleb said. "The fact that you knew the accounts so well, he used it to make it look like you had the knowledge to steal from them." She had not thought about it in exactly those words before. She sat with it for a moment. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what he did." Caleb was quiet. "That's not a mistake," he said. "That's strategy." "I know. That's why it worked." He looked at her steadily. "It didn't destroy you." It came close. "No," he said. "You walked up a mountain in the dark on the word of an old man you'd met an hour before. That's not a woman who's been destroyed." Evelyn looked at her coffee cup. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been scared every day for 3 months," she said. "I just didn't let it stop me." "That's the same thing as courage," Caleb said. "Most people think courage is not being afraid. It's not. It's being afraid and moving anyway." She looked up at him. He was looking at his own cup now, turning it slightly in his hands, with the distracted focus of a man who has said something he did not entirely plan to say, and has decided not to call it back. "You sound like you know something about that," she said. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I had a family. Not by blood. I was raised by a man named Daniel Walker and his wife Clara. They took me in when I was 9 years old. I don't know what I would have been without them." He paused. "They died in a fire, 12 years ago. I was 26. Evelyn said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. She had learned in her own grief that the wrong response to a person telling you about their loss was trying to fill the space it made. "I built this ranch because Daniel always wanted to," Caleb said. "He never had the money or the land to do it. He talked about it his whole life." He looked up. "I figured if I built it, it was something. Some way of keeping what he was alive." "It is," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "I mean that," she said. "I'm not saying it to comfort you. Everything about this ranch has someone's intention in it. The way the fencing is laid out, the way the barn is positioned to catch the morning light, so you're not working in your own shadow. Someone thought about all of it." Caleb was completely still. "Daniel planned the layout," he said. "On paper. He did it years before either of us had a piece of land to build on." "I know," Evelyn said. "I can see it." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that sits between two people when something real has just been said, and both of them know it, and neither of them is quite ready to move past it. May shifted under the table and put her head on Evelyn's foot. Neither of them mentioned it. The trouble arrived on a Thursday, which Evelyn would later think was a particularly unfair day for it. Thursdays were the days she reconciled the weekly accounts, which meant she was at the desk most of the morning, with the specific, pleasant absorption of numbers falling into order. And it was one of the few times during the week when her brain went quiet enough to forget for a little while the months behind her. She heard the horses before she heard the voices. She went to the hallway and listened. Caleb was on the porch. She could hear two men's voices not raised but with the deliberate clarity of men who were accustomed to being heard. She went to the front window and looked out. Two men on horseback, both well-dressed in the particular way of men whose wealth was managed rather than earned with their hands. The one doing the talking was about 50 heavyset, with a wide hat and a way of sitting his horse that was more authority than skill. The other was younger, lean and watchful, positioned slightly back and to the left. Not quite a bodyguard, but not quite not one either. "Mr. Walker," the older man was saying with the smooth ease of someone conducting a business meeting from the saddle. "I want to be very clear that this is a generous offer. The property values in this range are going to decline significantly over the next few years as the timber gets worked out. What I'm offering you now is considerably more than you'll be able to get in 5 years' time." "You've said that before," Caleb said. His voice was level, "and it remains true. I'm trying to help you make a sound decision." "I made my sound decision when I turned you down the first 2 times," Caleb said. The man and Evelyn understood now, with a cold settling in her stomach, that this was Richard Blackwell himself, smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who used warmth as a tool rather than an expression. "I heard you've taken on a new," he paused, "employee. A woman from Denton." Evelyn went very still at the window. "I have?" Caleb said. "I know who she is," Blackwell said. "I know her history. I have to say, Walker, I'm surprised at you. A man with your reputation letting someone with her background have access to your accounts." "My accounts are my business," Caleb said. "Of course. I'm only saying, as someone who has some experience with Victor Hale's situation, the woman has a history of financial irregularity. I'd hate to see a man like you taken advantage of." Evelyn's hands had gone flat against the wall. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. She heard Caleb take one step forward on the porch boards. "Get off my property," Caleb said. The warmth went out of Blackwell's voice. "I beg your pardon. You heard me." Caleb's voice had not risen. That was the most frightening thing about it. "You rode up here to make an offer. I've already refused twice, and to slander a woman who works for me, and you did both of those things on my land without my invitation. Now I'm inviting you to leave." Blackwell looked at him for a long moment. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," Caleb said. "But it's mine to make." There was a pause. Then the sound of horses being turned and hooves moving down the track. Evelyn pressed her back against the wall. She heard the porch door open and Caleb's boots on the kitchen floor, and then he appeared in the hallway and saw her standing there. He looked at her face. "You heard," he said. "Yes." "All right." He said nothing more than that, and she felt something she had not expected to feel in response to his total lack of commentary on what had just happened, which was relief. Deep bone-level relief. Because he had not looked at her to reassure her, had not softened the moment with platitudes or explanations. He had simply said all right, which meant yes, this is what it is, and we are going to deal with it, and your being here was never in question. "He's not going to stop," Evelyn said. "No," Caleb said. "He'll come back with something worse than words." "I know." She looked at him. "Caleb." It was the first time she had used his given name. They both registered it. "I know things about how they operate that could help," she said. "Not just what I've already written down. I have a memory for the accounts I worked, specific entries, specific vendor names, specific patterns. If Blackwell and Hale are connected the way I think they are, there will be a paper trail, not obvious, but there." He was watching her with that steady attention. "What would you need?" he said. "Access to the county records and Billings, and someone to help me get there. I can get you to Billings." "It could be dangerous," she said. "If they find out I'm looking." "Evelyn." He said her name the way she had said his, with the weight of something deliberate behind it. "I hired you because I needed someone to manage my accounts. I figured out about 4 days after you arrived that what I actually have is someone who understands exactly what's being done to this ranch, and probably the only person in the territory who can prove it." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you to stop doing what you're doing, because it might be dangerous." She looked at him. "I'm also not going to let anything happen to you," he said. "While you're here, that's also part of it." It was the most he had said at once since she arrived, and she understood the effort it represented for a man of his particular economy with words. "All right," she said. He nodded. "We'll leave for Billings on Monday," he said. "Early." I went back to the kitchen and she heard him pour himself coffee and then go out the back toward the barn, and she stood in the hallway for a moment with her hands loose at her sides and the particular feeling that came when you had been carrying something very heavy for a long time, and someone had, without making any ceremony of it, simply put their hand under their share of the weight. She went back to the study. She sat back down at the desk. She picked up her pencil, and she began for the first time to write down not just what she knew about Hale's accounts, but everything, every name, every number, every pattern, every transaction she had memorized in 2 years of working in that office. Every piece of the picture that she had been carrying alone in her head since the day Victor Hale had stood in front of that town and made her into the villain of a story she had never written. She wrote for 3 hours. May lay under the desk. Outside, she could hear Caleb moving in the barn, the rhythm of his work, the low sound of him speaking to the horses in the brief, practical way he spoke to everything he cared for. Evelyn Carter had been running for 3 months. She had not realized until this moment, sitting at this desk on this mountain, with the pencil moving across the page, and the sound of a man she was beginning to trust, drifting through the window from the barn, that she had stopped. She was not running anymore. She was building. And somewhere in that distinction was the first real breath she had taken in a very long time. Monday came with a cold wind off the northern peaks, and a sky the color of old pewter, and Evelyn was ready before Caleb was, which she suspected surprised him, even though he did not say so. She had spent Sunday evening organizing everything she had written into a leather satchel she had borrowed from the supply closet. Not just her notes on Hale's accounting patterns, but a timeline she had constructed from memory, a list of vendor names and corresponding transaction anomalies, and a separate document detailing the specific methods she had observed Blackwell's land company use in the Denton area. She had written it all out twice, once in full, once in summary, because she had learned from her time at Hale Mining that the people who controlled information controlled everything, and she was not going to arrive in Billings with her evidence scattered and unordered. Caleb looked at the satchel when she came into the kitchen. "That's everything," he said. "That's everything I can prove from memory," she said. "The county records will give us the rest." He poured coffee into a travel canteen and handed it to her without being asked, and she took it and did not remark on the gesture because she had learned that remarking on his small attentions made him stop doing them, and she did not want him to stop. They rode down the mountain trail in the early gray, May watching from the porch as they went, and Evelyn felt the particular charged quiet of two people moving toward something they both understood was going to change things. She had felt this before on the morning she had first found the discrepancies in Hale's accounts, on the morning she had walked into Hale's office to report them. This sense of a door swinging open in one direction. Only, no going back through it once you stepped across the threshold. "Tell me about the county records," Caleb said when they were down far enough that the trail widened. "What are we looking for?" "Property transaction records," Evelyn said. "Specifically, any filings associated with Blackwell's land company. He operates under at least 2 names, possibly 3. Black River Holdings is the primary one. I saw correspondence with that name in Hale's office. If he's been filing pressure documents against your title, they'll be in the county ledger. And if they are, then we have evidence of a coordinated scheme. The cut fencing, the fake assessor, the offers alone. Each one is just pressure. But if there's a paper trail in the county records connecting Blackwell's filings to the same timeline as the physical damage to your property, that's not pressure anymore. That's a conspiracy to defraud." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "Since the second day I was here," she said, "when you told me about the offers." He looked at her sideways. "Why didn't you say so then?" "Because I needed 2 more weeks of your records before I could say it with anything behind it," she said. "I don't make accusations I can't support. I learned that the hard way." She had not intended that last sentence to carry the weight it did, but it landed between them with the specific gravity of everything she had been through, and Caleb did not look away from the trail. But she saw his jaw tighten slightly, the way it did when he was processing something he felt strongly about and had decided not to say yet. They were an hour outside Billings when the first thing went wrong. Evelyn saw it before Caleb did. A rider coming toward them on the road, moving with the directional urgency of someone who had been looking for something and had just found it. She put her hand on Caleb's arm without thinking, and he pulled up his horse immediately, no questions asked, which told her something about the trust they had built without either of them naming it. The rider was a young man, maybe 22, with a Billings livery brand on his horse, and an expression that was caught between nervousness and the attempt to look official. He pulled up in front of them. "You Walker," he said, looking at Caleb. "I am," Caleb said. "Got a message for you from the Red Hollow County office." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "Came in yesterday afternoon." Caleb took it and read it. His expression did not change. He handed it to Evelyn. She read it. It was a notice of property review, official county letterhead, signed by the county land assessor, stating that a complaint had been filed regarding the Walker property's compliance with Montana territorial grazing regulations, and that a formal assessment of the property would be conducted within 10 days. "Who filed the complaint?" Evelyn said to the rider. "Don't know, ma'am. I just carry the papers." "Who signed the assessor's name?" She held it up. The signature was a name she had not heard before. The rider shrugged and turned his horse around and left. Evelyn looked at the document. "This is it," she said. "This is how they do it. They file a complaint through a third party someone Blackwell pays or controls and use the official process to create a record of non-compliance. Even if the assessment finds nothing wrong, the complaint itself becomes part of the public record. And that record makes it look like the property is in dispute," she said. which makes buyers nervous, which drives down the value, which makes your position weaker if they ever push this to court. She folded the paper. We need to move faster. Caleb turned his horse back toward Billings without another word. The county records office was a low building near the center of town, with a clerk at the front desk who looked at Evelyn with the particular wariness that men in official positions sometimes showed women who came in alone asking for documents, and then looked at Caleb standing behind her and recalibrated immediately. We need to see the property transaction records for the Elk Range district going back 3 years, Evelyn said, and any complaint filings associated with ranches in that district in the last 6 months. The clerk looked at Caleb again. She's asking, Caleb said in a tone that was not unkind, but left no room for interpretation. So she's who you answer? The clerk answered Evelyn. It took 40 minutes to pull the records and another hour and a half for Evelyn to work through them at the reading table in the back of the office, and Caleb sat across from her and watched her face, because her face was where everything was happening. She moved through the pages with the focused speed of someone who knew exactly what patterns looked like and had been trained by 2 years of Hale's accounts to find the things that were meant not to be found. She found the first one 20 minutes in. Black River Holdings, she said quietly enough that only Caleb heard. They filed a timber rights inquiry on the Walker property 18 months ago, before you even received the first offer. Caleb leaned forward. They filed before they approached me. They were building the record before they even introduced themselves, she said. The inquiry is framed as a question. Are there active timber rights on this land? But the act of filing it creates a notation in the county record that draws a connection between your property and Blackwell's company. Anyone looking at a title search on your land would see this and wonder. That's... Caleb stopped. Deliberate, Evelyn said. Yes. She kept reading. The second thing she found was worse. It was a sworn statement filed 8 months ago, under the name of a man she did not recognize, Thomas Garrett, claiming that he had worked on the Walker property as a ranch hand and had witnessed mismanagement of cattle resulting in significant livestock loss. Evelyn stared at it. Thomas Garrett, she said. Do you know that name? Caleb read the statement. His expression went very still. No, he said. I have never employed anyone named Thomas Garrett. Someone filed a sworn statement in your county records under a false name, she said, alleging livestock mismanagement. Caleb, this is a fabricated witness. He sat back in his chair. She watched him absorb it, the full weight of it, the understanding that someone had not just pressured him or damaged his fencing, but had gone to the trouble of constructing a false legal record with a false name and a sworn statement that could, in the wrong court, with the wrong judge, be used against him. How long has this been there? He said. 8 months, she said. It was filed 4 months before the first offer. He said nothing. They've been building this for over a year, Evelyn said. The timber inquiry, the false witness statement, the complaint that arrived this morning, they're not pressuring you to sell. They're constructing a case that they can take to court if you refuse. Can they win it? Caleb said. With fabricated evidence, Evelyn said. Not if we can prove it's fabricated. The false witness statement is the most dangerous piece. If Thomas Garrett doesn't exist, we can prove it. But if he exists and Blackwell is paying him, then it's his word against mine. His word, a county record, and whatever they pull together between now and the assessment, she said. Yes. Caleb looked at the statement. Then he looked at her. What do we do? He said. In all the time she had been on the ranch, through all the conversations and the work and the evenings at the kitchen table, he had not once asked her what to do. He had listened to her analysis, accepted her findings, acted on her recommendations, but always as the decision-maker receiving information. This was the first time he had asked the question directly, and she understood what it cost him. We get copies of everything, she said. Every document, today. And then we find someone with legal standing in this county who isn't connected to Blackwell. I know a lawyer in Billings, Caleb said. Henry Marsh. He handled my property deed when I filed the title. He's not Blackwell's man. Is he good? He's honest, Caleb said. In my experience, that matters more. They got the copies. Henry Marsh was a thin, careful man in his 60s who had the manner of someone who had seen enough in 40 years of territorial law to be very difficult to shock and very easy to make angry when the right thing came along. He read every Evelyn put in front of him with the focused silence of a man who charged by the hour and earned every cent of it. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at Evelyn over the top of his glasses. "Where did you get this?" he said. "The county records office," she said. "Public documents." "I mean this." He tapped the summary she had written. "This analysis." "I wrote it." He looked at her. Then he looked at Caleb. "She wrote it," Caleb said. Marsh looked back at Evelyn. "Miss Carter," he said, "this is one of the clearest presentations of a coordinated property fraud scheme I have seen in 4 decades of practice." "Thank you," she said. "It's not entirely a compliment," he said, "because the scheme itself is sophisticated enough that proving it is going to require more than county records. We'd need to connect Blackwell directly to the false witness." "I know," Evelyn said. "I also have documentation from my time at Hale Mining in Denton that shows a pattern of exactly this type of operation. If I can show that Black River Holdings used identical methods in at least 2 prior acquisitions, that moves this from an accusation to a pattern of conduct." Marsh looked at her for a long moment. "You worked for Hale," he said. "I did. And I was falsely accused of theft when I found irregularities in his accounts." "I heard about that case," Marsh said quietly. "Then you know it was never prosecuted," Evelyn said. "Because there was nothing to prosecute. Hale made it administrative, fired me, damaged my reputation, ensured no one would hire me. He didn't need a court. He just needed people to believe him." Marsh took off his glasses and cleaned them. "Miss Carter," he said, "if the documents you have from Hale's operation show what you're describing, and if we can tie them to Blackwell's conduct here, we have a case. Not just a defense of Walker's property, a case against both of them." The room was very quiet. Caleb turned to look at Evelyn. She was already looking at him. "That was always going to be where this led," she said quietly. "If you're willing." He held her gaze. "I'm willing," he said. They rode back in the late afternoon, and the wind had picked up and was cold against their faces, and neither of them spoke for most of the ride. But it was not silence from distance. It was the silence of 2 people who were thinking about the same thing and did not need to say it out loud. About halfway up the mountain trail, Caleb said without looking at her, "You knew about Marsh." "What?" "When you decided to go to Billings. You knew we were going to need a lawyer. You planned for it." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I thought it was possible," she said. "You found more than you expected." "Yes. And now this is bigger than a property dispute." "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry. I know that wasn't what you signed up for when you gave me a room and a job." He was quiet long enough that she looked over at him. He was watching the trail ahead, with his jaw set and his hands easy on the reins, the particular posture of a man who was not troubled by what she had said, but was deciding how to answer it. "I told you about Daniel," he said finally. "About why I built this ranch." "Yes. This land is the only thing left of what he wanted," Caleb said. "I would rather fight for it the right way and lose than give it up without trying." He paused. "And I would rather do it with someone who knows what she's doing than alone." Evelyn looked at the trail. She felt the warmth of it. Not romantic, not simple, but the deep and specific warmth of being genuinely seen by someone who did not need anything from you except your honesty. "I know what I'm doing," she said. "I know you do," he said. "That's not in question." They came up the last stretch of trail and the ranch house came into view, lit from inside with the warm yellow of the oil lamps she had started leaving on when they went out, because she had noticed that Caleb always came back to a dark house, and that a dark house for a man who lived alone was its own kind of slow damage. May was on the porch. But May was not alone. There was a man standing on the porch. He was leaning against the railing with his arms crossed and his hat pulled low, and the moment Evelyn saw him, something cold moved through her chest, because she recognized him, not the man himself, but the type. The watchful stillness. The studied casualness of someone waiting who did not intend to look like they were waiting. Caleb saw him at the same moment. He did not slow his horse. They rode straight up to the porch, and Caleb dismounted in one fluid movement and stood between Evelyn and the man without appearing to position himself at all, as if he had simply happened to land there. "Who are you?" Caleb said. The man straightened. He was maybe 35, lean and weathered, with the kind of face that had been outdoors in all weather for a long time. He was not wearing a gun that Evelyn could see, which she noted, but did not find reassuring. "Name's Dawes," he said. "I work for Mr. Blackwell." "You're on my property without an invitation," Caleb said. "So talk fast." Dawes looked past Caleb at Evelyn, with an expression that was not quite threatening, but was designed to be read as a reminder of something. "Mr. Blackwell has a message for Miss Carter," he said. "Then he can deliver it himself," Caleb said. "He'd prefer not to make another trip up the mountain," Dawes said. He wanted to extend a courtesy. Miss Carter's situation in Denton, the accusations against her Mr. Blackwell, has some influence with the people involved. He wanted her to know that he could see to it that those accusations were formally withdrawn, cleared from the record. She could go back to any town in this territory with a clean name. Silence. Evelyn's hands tightened on the saddle. "And what would he need from me?" she said. Dawes looked at her. "Just your word that you won't involve yourself in Mr. Walker's property matter," he said. "That whatever you've been looking into, you stop looking." The offer sat in the air between them. Clean name. No more closed doors. No more explaining herself in every new town. No more carrying the weight of Victor Hale's lie like a stone around her neck. Everything she had lost offered back to her on a silver platter. All she had to do was abandon the man who had given her back her dignity. She heard Caleb shift his weight beside her. He did not say anything. He did not tell her what to do. He simply stood there waiting, and she understood that he would not try to influence this, would not ask anything of her, would stand here and be all right with whatever she decided, because he was that kind of man. Which was exactly why she was not going to take it. "Tell Mr. Blackwell," Evelyn said clearly, "that my name is already clean, it always was, and tell him that if he had any real intention of helping me, he would have done it without asking for anything in return." Dawes looked at her. "Miss Carter." "Tell him no," she said, "and tell him we've been to Billings today." She watched Dawes's face. She saw it, the small flicker of something that was not quite surprise, but was close enough to tell her that Blackwell had not expected them to move that fast. Good, she thought. Let him be surprised. Dawes looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at him with the particular quality of stillness that very large, very calm, very certain men possessed, the kind of stillness that did not need to escalate because it was already at the level it intended to stay at. Dawes stepped off the porch. "Mr. Blackwell won't be pleased," he said. "I imagine not," Caleb said. He waited until the sound of Dawes's horse was completely gone down the trail before he turned around. Evelyn had dismounted and was standing at the bottom of the porch steps with the satchel over her shoulder and her eyes on where Dawes had been. "You all right?" Caleb said. "I'm angry," she said. "But yes." "The offer was never real," she said. "Blackwell doesn't give things away. He uses them. If I had taken it, the withdrawal would have come with conditions I couldn't see yet, and eventually he would have used it to control me." Caleb looked at her for a moment. "You knew that immediately," he said, when he was still talking. "Yes. But you let him finish." "I wanted to hear the whole offer," she said, "in case there was something in it we could use." He shook his head very slightly. "Was there?" he said. "Yes," she said. "He just told us that he's worried. If he wasn't, he wouldn't offer me anything. He would just wait and let the legal process grind us down." She shifted the satchel on her shoulder. "He knows we found something in Billings." "Then he's going to move faster," Caleb said. "Yes, which means we have to move faster." They went inside. She spread everything out on the kitchen table, the copies from the county records, her notes, the summary for Marsh, and Caleb sat across from her, and they worked through it together. Him tracking the property timeline while she built the connection between Blackwell's methods here and the patterns she had documented from Hale's operations in Denton. At some point, May appeared from under the table and put her head in Evelyn's lap, which May had never done before, and Evelyn put her hand on the dog's head without stopping. The sentence she was in the middle of, and Caleb looked at the dog and then at Evelyn and said nothing, but his expression did something she had never seen it do before. It softened all the way through, not just at the edges, but completely for just a moment before settling back. "There's something else," Evelyn said, looking at the papers. "Tell me." "The false witness statement, Thomas Garrett." She looked up. "I've been thinking about it since we left the records office. If Blackwell went to the trouble of inventing a witness, he did it because he needed someone who could testify to conditions on your property, real conditions, things that could be verified. But Garrett doesn't exist, right? So if the statement contains specific details about the property, the north perimeter, the cattle count, particular incidents, those details had to come from someone who was actually here." She paused. "Caleb, the fake assessor, the man you let walk the public trail." Caleb was very still. "He wasn't an assessor," he said slowly. "He was gathering material." "For the statement," Evelyn said. "The statement was filed 2 weeks after his visit." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. "He was on my property," Caleb said, and there was something in his voice that was quiet and very cold, the way water got when it stopped moving and started to ice over. "He got enough information to build a false account that would hold up under basic scrutiny," Evelyn said, "but not enough to get everything right. Which means, if we go through the statement line by line, we'll find errors, things that would only be wrong if the witness hadn't actually been here. And those errors prove the statement is fabricated." "There's strong evidence," she said. "Yes." Caleb reached across the table and picked up the copy of the statement. He read through it slowly. Evelyn watched him. She saw the moment he found the first one, a slight narrowing of his eyes. He says I keep my main herd in the south pasture," Caleb said. "And my main herd has been in the northeast pasture for 2 years, since I extended the fencing." He looked up. "The south pasture is where I run the yearlings." "That's the first one," Evelyn said. He kept reading. "He says I lost 14 head last winter to exposure. I lost 3. And they weren't exposure, it was a water source that froze over. I found them and brought them in." 2, Evelyn said. He read further. "He says my barn has room for 40 horses." He set the paper down. "My barn has 8 stalls. It was built for cattle work, not horses. Anyone who had been in that barn for 30 seconds would know that." Evelyn exhaled. "3 significant factual errors," she said. "In a sworn witness statement. Caleb, this is provably false. Any judge in this territory who looks at this against the actual property records will see it." He looked at her across the table. "You're going to take them down," he said. "We're going to take them down," she said. "We need Marsh to file a counter-complaint against the false statement before the assessment happens. If we get there first, if the fabricated statement is already under legal challenge, when the assessors arrive, it changes the entire posture of this case." "How fast can we make that happen?" "I need to write it up tonight," she said. "Everything. The errors in the statement, the connection to Blackwell, the pattern from Denton. If Marsh has it by Wednesday, he can file by Friday." "Then write," Caleb said. "I'll keep the coffee going." She wrote. For 4 hours, she sat at the kitchen table and built the case document by document, argument by argument. The way she had once built accounts for a man who used her skill against her, and the difference was so complete and so clear that it made her chest ache in a way that was not entirely pain. Caleb moved in and out of the kitchen, keeping the fire in the stove, refilling her coffee, setting a plate of bread and dried meat at her elbow. Without comment, checking the windows twice in a way that looked casual and was not. At one point she looked up and found him standing at the kitchen window with his back to her, looking out at the dark. "What are you watching for?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Everything." A pause. "Dawes took the news back to Blackwell hours ago. I want to know what comes next." "What do you think comes next?" He turned from the window. "I think they move to the physical," he said. "The legal process is too slow now that they know we're in it. If they're going to create enough damage to the property to justify the assessment findings, they have to do it before Marsh files." Evelyn looked at him. "How many men does Blackwell have?" she said. "I don't know," Caleb said. Enough. You have a rifle, she said. I have two, he said, and enough shells to make their night unpleasant. He looked at her steadily. Do you know how to shoot? She held his gaze. My father taught me when I was 10, she said. Something in his face shifted, not surprise but a kind of recognition, the way you recognized something you had suspected was true. All right, he said. Then tonight we both keep watch. You finish what you're writing and I'll check the perimeter. We sleep in shifts if we sleep at all. Caleb. He stopped. Thank you, she said. Not for tonight, for all of it. He looked at her for a long moment. You came up a mountain in the dark, he said quietly. And you've been fighting for this place ever since. Don't thank me for that. She looked back at the papers. She picked up her pencil. Outside in the dark. The Montana mountains were very still and very large, and somewhere down the trail, a man on a horse was riding back to report to someone who had a great deal of money and no conscience, and none of that was good. But inside the kitchen, a woman who had been called a thief and a liar and a problem and a mistake was writing the truth down in clear and careful language. And a man who had lost everything he loved was standing guard over what they were building together, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything. She finished writing at midnight. Her hand was cramped, and her eyes burned, and she had drunk more coffee than was wise, but the document was complete. 41 pages of organized, sourced, cross-referenced evidence that connected Richard Blackwell's Black River Holdings to a coordinated scheme of property fraud, stretching back 3 years and touching at least 4 properties in the Montana Territory, including Caleb's ranch, and 2 of the operations Victor Hale had acquired in Denton. She set down her pencil and stretched both hands flat on the table and looked at what she had built. It was the most important thing she had ever written, more important than any account ledger. More important than the report she had tried to give Hale's office 18 months ago, the one that had destroyed her life. This was the complete version of that story, the one with all the pieces in it, the one that did not just show what was wrong, but showed who had done it, and how and why and for how long. She heard Caleb's boots on the back porch, and then the door, and he came into the kitchen with cold air on his coat and May at his heels, and looked at the papers stacked on the table. Done, he said. Done, she said. He came to the table and stood beside her and looked at the stack without touching it. All of it, he said. Everything. Blackwell Hale, the false witness statement, the billing fraud in Billings, the 2 prior acquisitions, in Denton the pattern. Marsh can take this to the territorial court if he needs to. It's not just a defense anymore. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You did all of this in 4 hours, he said. I've had 18 months to think about it, she said. Tonight I just wrote it down. He looked at her. Then, not the measuring look he had given her in the first days, not the watchful attention she had grown used to, but something different. Something more direct and less guarded. The look of a man who had decided that the careful distance he had maintained was no longer serving any purpose he could justify. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I'll take the first watch, 3 hours, then you. She started to argue and stopped, because she recognized the particular quality of his tone, the one that was not a command, but was so close to a decision that arguing with it felt like arguing with gravity. Wake me at 3, she said. I will. She gathered the papers into the satchel and went to her room, and she was asleep inside of 4 minutes, which was a measure of how thoroughly her body had been waiting for permission. Caleb did not wake her at 3. He woke her at 2:15, because at 2:15 he heard something on the north perimeter that was not the wind and not the cattle and not anything that belonged to the natural quiet of the mountain at that hour. He knocked once on her door. She was on her feet before the knock finished. She had slept in her clothes. She came out into the hallway, and he was already there, his rifle in his right hand, and his expression carrying the specific controlled tension of a man who had heard something he did not like and had made his decision about what to do about it. How many? She said immediately. He looked at her. I don't know yet, he said. I heard 2 horses stop about a quarter-mile north. Maybe 3. The cut fencing section. Yes. She went to the study and took the second rifle from the rack on the wall where it had been sitting since her second day on the ranch. She checked it the way her father had taught her, quickly, thoroughly, with the focused hands of someone who had learned the lesson that a weapon you do not check is a weapon you cannot trust. Caleb watched her do it. He said nothing. "The cattle," she said. "The northeast pasture is closest to where they stopped," he said. "If they're going to do damage fast, that's where they'll go. We can't be in two places." "No," he said. "I'll take the perimeter. You stay on the house and the documents." Caleb. "The documents are the case," he said. "If they take those tonight doesn't matter, and neither does Marsh." He looked at her steadily. "You know I'm right." She did know he was right. She hated knowing it. "If anything sounds wrong," she said, "I mean anything. I'll fire twice," he said. "You'll hear it." He went out the back. She moved to the front window and stood to the side of it, not in front, not visible, and watched the dark. May was beside her, very still, her ears forward, which told Evelyn more than any human assessment could about whether something was actually out there. May's body was the kind of instrument that did not produce false readings. Something was out there. 10 minutes passed. 15. The silence was the specific silence of a place where sound had recently been, and then stopped, and Evelyn had grown up in enough rough country to know the difference between natural quiet and held-breath quiet. Then she heard it. Not from the north perimeter, from the south. Boots on dry ground, careful and slow. The way a man walked when he was trying not to be heard and was not quite succeeding. Coming around the south side of the ranch house, moving toward the front. Evelyn stepped back from the window. Her heart was beating hard, but her hands were steady. She had noticed this about herself in the last month, that her body had developed a response to danger that was not calm exactly, but functional. The fear was there. It did not run her. The footsteps stopped at the south corner of the house. Then a voice, low, meant to carry only to the door, said, "Miss Carter, I know you're in there. I'm not here to hurt you." She recognized the voice. Dawes, Blackwell's man. She did not move. She did not respond. "Miss Carter." His voice was still low, but there was an edge in it now, the edge of a man who had been sent to do something and had a time limit on doing it. "Mr. Blackwell's offer is off the table after tonight. This is your last chance to walk away from this with your name clear and your person unharmed." Her person unharmed. She felt something go cold and sharp inside her, the way anger went when it was serious. She moved to the door, not opening it, standing to the side of it, her back against the wall. "Dawes," she said, loud enough to carry through the wood. A pause. "Ma'am? How many men does Blackwell have on this property right now?" Another pause. Longer. "Ma'am, that's not—" "I'm going to ask you one more time," she said. "How many men?" Silence. "4, Dawes said, "including me." "And what are the other 3 doing right now?" No answer. She already knew. She moved to the back window and looked north, and she could see it, a light that should not have been there. Orange and small and moving with the specific restless quality of something that had been recently lit and was deciding how far it wanted to go. They were burning the north fence line, not the cattle, not the barn. The fence line, because a burning fence line in the county records became documented property damage, and documented property damage within 10 days of a formal complaint became evidence of a ranch in decline, and evidence of a ranch in decline was exactly what Blackwell needed to push the assessment findings his way. She went to the back door. "Dawes," she said, loud enough to carry around the corner. "Tell your men on the north perimeter to stop what they're doing and leave this property. Miss Carter, because if they don't," she said, "I am going to ride to Red Hollow tonight right now with 41 pages of documentation that connects Richard Blackwell to property fraud across 4 ranches and names. Victor Hale as his financial partner, and I will hand it to the first person with a badge that I find. And everything your employer has built in this territory comes apart by morning." A very long silence. "You don't have." "I have everything," she said. "I have been building this case for 18 months. I know every account, every false entry, every vendor name, every fabricated document. I know about Thomas Garrett, who has never worked on this ranch, and whose statement contains 3 provable factual errors. I know about the timber inquiry filed before Mr. Blackwell ever introduced himself to Caleb Walker. I know about the 2 ranches in Denton that Hale acquired using the same methods you are using tonight. She paused. Do you want to keep going, or do you want to take your men and leave? Silence. Complete, absolute silence. And then, distantly from the north, she heard voices. A brief exchange. Movement. And then the orange light stopped moving. May made a sound that was not quite a bark. A low exhale of focused attention released the sound a working dog made when the thing it had been watching retreated. Evelyn leaned her back against the door. Her hands were shaking now, which was fine, because the shaking meant the danger had passed, and her body was allowed to feel it. She had learned that about herself, too. During the crisis, her hands stayed still. Afterward, they had their say. She heard Dawes's footsteps move away from the south corner. She heard horses. 3 sets of hooves, then a 4th moving away down the north trail. Then Caleb's voice from outside, one word sharp, and directed, Evelyn. She pulled the back door open. Howe was coming across the yard from the north at a controlled run, which was the fastest she had ever seen him move, and he was carrying the rifle in his right hand, and his face had an expression on it she had not seen before, something between fear and fury. The specific combination a person wore when they had been afraid for someone else. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face, her hands down, and back up. Are you hurt? He said. No. I heard you talking to someone. Dawes. He's gone. The others. Gone. I heard them leave. She looked at him. What happened on the north perimeter? 3 men, he said. They'd already cut 2 more sections of fence, and they were lighting a fire line along the 3rd post. I came up on them from the east. He paused. They ran. Did they see you clearly? Clearly enough. She understood what that meant. Caleb Walker at close range in the dark, armed and moving fast, was not an invitation to linger. The fire. Put it out. Fence is cut, but the posts are still standing. I can repair it tomorrow. She exhaled. He looked at the rifle in her hands. Then he looked at her face again. What did you say to Dawes? He said. She told him. Everything, the threat, the specific details she had named the moment the light on the north perimeter went out. When she finished, Caleb was quiet for long enough that she counted the seconds without meaning to. You bluffed, he said. I did not bluff, she said. I have every one of those documents. You threatened to ride to Red Hollow tonight. I would have. He looked at her. Alone, he said. In the dark. On dust. Yes. Evelyn. I would have done it, she said steadily. And it would have worked. The documents are real. The case is real. Everything I told Dawes is true. He was still for a moment. Then he did something she had not expected. He reached out and put his hand on the side of her face just briefly. Just for a moment, his palm against her cheek and his thumb against her temple. The touch of a man checking that something he valued was still in one piece. And then he dropped his hand and stepped back and looked away at the north perimeter. All right, he said. His voice was rough at the edges. All right. She stood very still and let the moment settle. We need to get the documents to Marsh before they regroup, she said. Tomorrow, he said. First light. Tonight we stay close. She did not argue. They went back inside. Caleb put more wood on the stove, and they sat at the kitchen table with their coffee and the satchel of papers between them. Not talking much. Both of them present in the specific way that people were present after something dangerous had passed close by and had not quite touched them. At some point, May climbed onto the bench beside Evelyn and pressed her side against Evelyn's ribs, which she had never done before, and Caleb looked at the dog and said, She doesn't do that. She's doing it now, Evelyn said. He looked at both of them. She didn't do it with anyone before you, he said. Not accusatory, just noting it, the way he noted everything. Evelyn put her arm around May and drank her coffee. Outside the Montana, dark was deep and cold and quiet. And somewhere down the mountain, Richard Blackwell was receiving a report about what had happened tonight, and his response to that report was going to determine everything about the next 72 hours. Evelyn knew this. She thought about it with the clear, practical attention that had served her through 18 months of being hunted by powerful men. And she thought about what Blackwell would do when he understood that the woman he had tried to buy and then tried to frighten had spent 4 hours tonight building the most complete legal case against him that anyone in this territory had ever assembled. He would not retreat. Men like Blackwell never retreated. They escalated. "He's going to contact someone in the county office," she said, not to break the silence so much as because the thought had arrived fully formed and needed to be said. "Tonight or first thing tomorrow. He's going to try to move the assessment forward earlier than 10 days. He'll want it done before Marsh can file." Caleb looked up from his coffee. "How much earlier?" 3 days, maybe 4. If he has someone in the county office who can authorize an expedited review, he'll use them now. Do we know if he does? "We didn't yesterday," she said. "But look at the pattern. Blackwell has operated in this territory for 3 years without anyone challenging him. That doesn't happen without cooperation somewhere in the official structure." Caleb set his cup down. "Marsh," he said. "We need to get to Marsh before the county office opens tomorrow." 6 o'clock ride, she said. 5, he said. "I want to be in his office when he arrives." They looked at each other across the table. "I need to add one more page to the document," she said. "Tonight's events. The fire, the men, Dawes's visit, the threat he made. It goes in." "Write it," he said. She pulled the satchel toward her and took out the papers and found the last page and picked up her pencil, and Caleb got up and refilled both their coffee cups without being asked, and May settled more firmly against Evelyn's side, and the clock on the shelf read 20 past 2 in the morning. She wrote. She wrote about Dawes at the door and the fire on the north perimeter, and the specific words of the threat, "Your person unharmed." And she wrote about the response she had given and the result. And she wrote about the cut fence sections and the attempted arson and the 4 men on a private property without invitation at 2 in the morning. She wrote it exactly as it had happened, with dates and approximate times and the names she knew. It was one more page. It was in its way the most important page of all, because it transformed everything that had come before it, from historical pattern into present active ongoing conduct. They were not just describing what Blackwell had done in the past. They were describing what he had done tonight. She set down her pencil at 10 minutes to 3. "Done," she said. Caleb took the page and read it. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the stack and squared the edges of the whole document with the flat of his hand, the way you handled something you were determined to protect. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked at him. "When this is over," he said, "when Marsh files, when the case is in front of the right people, when your name is formally cleared." He stopped. He looked at the table. He was a man who chose words with the care of someone who did not have unlimited supply of them and knew it. "What do you want to do?" She understood the question. She understood it went past the legal case, past the ranch, past the practical logistics of jobs and lodging, and the next town down the road. She looked at him steadily. "I haven't let myself think about it," she said. "I've been too busy surviving to think about what comes after surviving." "Think about it now," he said, "for 1 minute." She was quiet. She thought about the desk in the study, and the ledgers on the shelves, and May under her feet, and the coffee at first light, and the north pasture in the morning, and the way this ranch felt not like a place she was staying, but like a place that had closed around her in the way that places did when they fit. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like to stay somewhere long enough to finish what I started." He looked at her. "The accounts for this ranch," she said, "are a 2-year project minimum. I've been here less than a month. I'd hate to leave something incomplete." Something happened in Caleb Walker's face that she had never seen happen before, a slow and unguarded opening, like a window being raised in a house that had been shut for a very long time. "The accounts are a mess," he agreed. "It would be irresponsible to leave them half done." "Very irresponsible," she said. "Then I suppose you'll have to stay," he said. "I suppose I will," she said. They looked at each other across the kitchen table at 3 in the morning, with the evidence of everything between them and May pressed warm against Evelyn's side, and the stove burning steady, and it was not a declaration. They were not people who made declarations, but it was true, and they both knew it, and that was more than enough. They left for Billings at 5. The ride down the mountain in the pre-dawn was familiar to Evelyn now, in a way it had not been on that first desperate climb 6 weeks ago. She knew the split pine and the left fork, and the place where the trail widened, and the particular angle of the light when it was coming, but not yet arrived. She knew this mountain the way she had not let herself know any place in 18 months, with the bone-deep knowledge of someone who had decided it was safe to learn. Marsh's office was dark when they arrived. They waited. He appeared at 6:45 with his coat half-buttoned and his hat on sideways, which told Evelyn that someone had reached him before they did, and the news had moved faster than even she had expected. "Walker," he said. "Miss Carter, I was about to write out to you." "What happened?" Caleb said. "The county office received a request last night for an expedited assessment of your property," Marsh said. "Filed under emergency provisions, alleged imminent threat to territorial land management standards." He looked at Evelyn. "It's been approved. The assessors are scheduled for tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. Not 10 days. Tomorrow. Evelyn's hands tightened on the satchel. "Who approved it?" she said. "Deputy Land Commissioner Alton Pierce," Marsh said. She felt the cold certainty of a piece falling into place. "Pierce," she said. "Is he connected to Blackwell?" Marsh looked at her carefully. "What do you know?" "In Denton 2 years ago, a deputy commissioner named A. Pierce signed off on an expedited assessment for a property Hale subsequently acquired." She opened the satchel. "I have it in here. I wasn't sure until right now whether it was the same man." Marsh stared at her. "You have Pierce on paper," he said. It was not quite a question. "I have a signature on a document," she said. "I'll need you to verify it's the same Pierce. But if it is..." "If it is," Marsh said, "we are not talking about property fraud anymore." "No," Evelyn said. "We're talking about official corruption." The silence in the early morning street was absolute. Marsh looked at the satchel. Then he looked at Evelyn. "Come inside," he said. "Right now, both of you." They went inside. Marsh lit his lamps and spread everything on his desk, and Evelyn stood beside him and walked him through it, page by page, the way she had organized it. The chronology first, then the pattern analysis, then the specific documents, then the night's events, and last, the Denton connection with Pierce's signature at the end of it. Marsh read the Pierce document for a very long time. Then he sat back in his chair and removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes." "How long have you been carrying all of this?" She thought about it honestly. 18 months, she said. "In my head. On paper since Monday night." He shook his head slowly. "I'm going to file a counter-complaint this morning," he said. "Against the expedited assessment, against the false witness statement, against the property interference documented in last night's incident, and against Deputy Commissioner Pierce's involvement in both this case and the Denton acquisitions." He looked at Caleb. "I'm also going to need a sworn statement from you about the men on your property last night." "You'll have it," Caleb said. "And from you, Miss Carter, about Dawes's visit and the threat made." "Yes," she said. "This is going to move fast," Marsh said. "When Pierce understands that he's in the filing, he will either go to ground or go to Blackwell, and either way, things become unpredictable. I want you both to stay visible and in contact. Don't go back up that mountain alone." "We'll stay in Billings today," Caleb said. He glanced at Evelyn. "If you're all right with that." She was looking at the spread of documents on Marsh's desk. Everything she had written, every piece of the thing she had been building in her head and her heart for 18 months, laid out in the clear morning light where it could finally be seen. "Yes," she said. "I'm all right with that." They gave their statements. Marsh filed at 9 o'clock in the morning, and by 10, the filing had reached the territorial court office, and by 11, there were two things happening simultaneously that neither Blackwell nor Pierce had anticipated when they had approved the expedited assessment the night before. The first was that the counter-complaint had named them both. The second was that a copy of the full 42-page document, including the Denton records, the false witness analysis, and the Pierce signature had been delivered by hand to the editor of the Billings Gazette, because Evelyn Carter had learned from her time at Hale Mining that powerful men feared the law, but they were absolutely terrified of the newspaper. Caleb found out about the newspaper when he came back from the telegraph office, where he had been sending a message to Samuel Reed, and found Evelyn talking to a man with ink-stained hands and a notebook who was writing down everything she said with the focused intensity of a man who understood he was listening to the most important story he was going to print that year. Caleb stood back. He watched her talk, calm and precise and unsparing, saying names and figures and dates with the same clear authority she brought to the accounts, giving the reporter exactly enough to print and exactly what needed to be in print. The reporter looked up and saw Caleb watching and said, "Are you Walker, the ranch owner?" "I am," Caleb said. "Do you want to add anything?" Caleb looked at Evelyn. She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that was different from any expression she had given him before. Not the professional clarity, or the measured trust, or even the warmth from the evenings at the kitchen table, but something more open and more vulnerable and more certain all at once. "She said it," Caleb told the reporter. "Everything that needed saying." The reporter wrote that down too, and Evelyn Carter, who had spent 18 months being the woman no one would listen to, stood in the morning light in Billings, Montana, and understood that the silence was over. The Billings Gazette ran the story on Friday morning. Evelyn knew it was out before she saw the paper, because she heard it, the particular quality of a town shifting the way conversation changed when something large and irreversible had moved through it. She and Caleb were at the hotel where Marsh had insisted they stay for the night, unwilling to send them back up the mountain until he understood how Blackwell intended to respond to the filing. And she was at the window when she saw the boy running papers down the main street, and the way people took them and stopped walking and stood reading with the particular stillness of people absorbing something that rearranged what they thought they knew. She went downstairs. Caleb was already in the small dining room with a copy of the paper flat on the table in front of him, his coffee untouched beside it, reading with the focused silence he brought to everything that mattered. She sat down across from him. He turned the paper so she could read the front page. The headline read, "Territorial Fraud Scheme, Exposed Land Commissioner Implicated in Coordinated Property Theft Across 3 Counties." Below it in smaller type, Billings Attorney Files, Criminal Complaint Naming, Black River Holdings Principal Richard Blackwell, Hale Mining Owner, Victor Hale, and Deputy Land Commissioner Alton Pierce. Below that, key evidence, compiled by dismissed Hale Mining bookkeeper, formerly accused of theft, proves case of deliberate wrongful termination. Evelyn read it twice. She had known the story was coming. She had talked to the reporter herself. She had chosen every word with precision and intention. And yet seeing it in print, seeing her name in type, not as an accusation, but as a source, not as a suspect, but as the person who had uncovered the truth, did something to her chest that she had not entirely prepared for. Her eyes burned. She did not cry, but it was close. "You all right?" Caleb said. She pushed the paper back across to him. "My name is in there," she said, "as the person who built the case." "Yes. Not as the woman who stole from Hale." "No," he said. "Not that." She pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. 18 months, she said quietly. It was not a complaint. It was just the number, the weight of it, the specific measure of time that it took for truth to catch up to a powerful man's lie, when the person telling the truth had no money and no connections and nothing but a clear memory and the stubbornness to keep going. Caleb reached across the table and put his hand over both of hers for just a moment. Not long, not dramatic, just the brief, steady pressure of a hand that knew what it was doing. "Eat something," he said. "Marsh is coming at 9. She ate something. Marsh arrived at 9:10 with the energized composure of a man who had not slept much and had enjoyed every minute of not sleeping. He set his briefcase on the table and sat down and looked at both of them with the expression of someone carrying news that was not yet all good, but was moving in the right direction with considerable momentum. "Pierce," he said. "He went to Blackwell last night as I expected. This morning at 7 o'clock, he submitted a voluntary resignation from the Deputy Commissioner's office, citing personal reasons." Evelyn looked at him. "He resigned. Before the Territorial Attorney's office could suspend him. Marsh said. It doesn't help him legally. A resignation doesn't close the complaint, but it tells us he knows the Pierce signature in your Denton documents is verifiable. He's not going to fight the identification. That means the corruption charge holds, Evelyn said. It holds, Marsh confirmed. And with Pierce removed from the equation, the expedited assessment he approved is automatically voided. No assessors are coming to your property tomorrow, Walker. Caleb's expression did not change by much, but something in his shoulders moved a release so slight that only someone who had been watching him carefully for weeks would have caught it. What about Blackwell? He said. Marsh opened his briefcase. Blackwell's attorney contacted me this morning at 8:15, he said. They want to negotiate. The word sat in the air. Evelyn looked at Marsh carefully. What kind of negotiate? She said. The dropping of criminal charges in exchange for a settlement financial compensation to the affected property owners and a formal withdrawal of all filings against your property. Walker, including the false witness statement. And Hale, Evelyn said. Marsh looked at her. Hale is not part of the negotiation offer, he said. Blackwell is willing to give up Hale to protect himself. Evelyn was quiet. What about the charges against me? She said. The original accusation from Denton. The theft allegation. Marsh nodded slowly. That's part of the package they're offering. A formal written signed withdrawal of the allegations against you submitted to the Denton County Records and the Territorial Employment Board. Your record cleared completely. She absorbed this. Everything she had wanted for 18 months. The clear name. The formal acknowledgement that what Hale had done to her was a lie. Official documented signed. In exchange for what, she said. Blackwell does not face criminal charges, Marsh said. He pays the settlement, withdraws the filings, and the territorial attorney accepts it as a civil resolution. He walks away, Caleb said. His voice was flat. He walks away from the criminal proceeding, Marsh said carefully. He does not walk away from the financial settlement, which is substantial, and he does not walk away from the public record. The Gazette story is already out, and that cannot be negotiated. Caleb looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. This was her decision. They both knew it. The ranch was Caleb's, the property, the fencing, the cattle, but the original wrong that had started all of it. The thing that had put her on a mountain road in the dark, looking for any door that would open, that was hers. And whether to trade the criminal charge for the clean name was a question only she could answer. She thought about it honestly. She thought about what a criminal trial would mean. Months of proceedings. Hale's lawyers. Blackwell's lawyers. The cost to Caleb of continuing to fight the risk that something went wrong in a territorial court that might be less clean than Marsh believed. She thought about the 42 pages she had written, and the reporter with the ink-stained hands, and the front page of the Billings Gazette sitting on the table between them. She thought about what her mother would have said. Her mother who had cried for 3 days and then gotten back up. Her mother who had said, "You do what needs doing." Her mother who had never once confused winning with revenge and had always understood the difference. Is Hale included in the formal withdrawal of charges against me? She said. Yes, Marsh said. Both Hale and Blackwell must co-sign the withdrawal. And it goes to the Territorial Employment Board. In writing officially filed. Then I want one more thing, she said. Marsh looked at her. I want a letter, she said. Not just a withdrawal. A letter signed by Victor Hale stating specifically that I discovered financial irregularities in his accounts that were accurate, that I reported them in good faith, and that the subsequent accusations made against me were false and were made to protect his own interests. She paused. I want the truth written in his hand. Marsh blinked. That's Miss Carter, that's a significant ask. I know what it is, she said. And I know he won't want to sign it. But if Blackwell is protecting himself by giving up Hale, then Hale has very little leverage right now. He signs the letter or he faces the criminal proceeding alone. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb said, She's right. Marsh picked up his briefcase. I'll go back to them, he said. He went. They waited 2 hours. They were long hours. The particular length of hours that existed in the space between having done everything you could do and finding out whether it was enough. Evelyn spent them at the table with her hands around her coffee cup, not restless, just present. Caleb spent them moving to the window, back to the table, to the door, to check the street. Back to the table with the controlled energy of a man who was better at doing than waiting, but had decided that waiting was what the moment required. At one point, he sat down across from her and said, "Whatever they say, whatever Marsh comes back with, you understand that none of this changes." "Caleb," she said. He stopped. "I know," she said. He was quiet. "I just wanted to say it," he said. "I heard it," she said. "Both times." He looked at her. A slow breath. A nod. They waited. Marsh came back at 11:30. He sat down and opened his briefcase and placed a document on the table between them and turned it so they could read it. It was a letter. Victor Hale's letter. She read every word. It was not graceful. The language was stiff with legal formality and the resentment of a man writing under duress, but it was there. Every fact she had asked for. The discovery of the irregularities, the accurate nature of her reporting, the false accusations made to deflect the investigation from him, his name at the bottom, his signature beneath it. 18 months of being called a liar. In his handwriting. Addressed to her. She folded it. She put it in the satchel. She looked up at Marsh. "Tell them yes," she said. Marsh nodded and picked up his pen. The settlement was formalized that afternoon. The false witness statement against Caleb's property was officially voided from the county records. The timber inquiry filed by Black River Holdings was struck. The complaint that had triggered the expedited assessment was withdrawn. Every document Blackwell had spent a year and a half building against the Walker Ranch was removed from the public record as if it had never existed, though the Gazette story meant the world knew it had. And in the Denton County records and the Territorial Employment Board, files a formal withdrawal of all charges against Evelyn Carter was entered accompanied by a co-signed letter of false accusation from Victor Hale and Richard Blackwell, which Marsh had insisted on as the final term, because Marsh was the kind of lawyer who understood that incomplete truth was still a lie wearing different clothes. They rode back up the mountain in the late afternoon. Neither of them said much on the ride, and neither of them needed to. There was a quality to the silence that was different from all the silences before it. Not the careful quiet of two people maintaining distance, not the focused quiet of work or watchfulness or waiting, but the easy silence of two people who had said the things that mattered and did not need to fill the space where those things now lived. When the ranch house came into view, Evelyn stopped her horse. Caleb pulled up beside her. She was looking at the house, the porch, the barn, the fence lines running east and west, the cattle in the northeast pasture where they were supposed to be May's small shape already moving toward them from the porch at a purposeful trot. "It looks different," she said. Caleb looked at her. "It looked like a place I was staying," she said. "Now it looks—" She stopped. She was not a woman who had trouble finding words, but this one required care. "Now it looks like the place I live." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's because it is." She looked at him. He was watching the ranch with that steady, unsentimental attention he gave to things he loved. "You came up here asking for work," he said. "You earned more than work. You earned—" He paused the way he always paused when the words mattered. "You earned a stake in this place. What you did, what you built, that's part of what this ranch is now. You can't separate that." "I wasn't trying to separate it," she said. "No," he said. "I know, I'm saying you don't have to." May arrived below them and looked up at Evelyn with the complete focused devotion she had been giving her since the second week, and Evelyn swung down from the horse and the dog pressed immediately against her legs, and she put her hand on May's head and stood there on the trail with her hand on the dog, and the evening coming in cool and clean around them. "Caleb," she said. He dismounted. He was standing a few feet from her with his reins loose in his hand and his eyes on her face. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need to say it plainly because I am not a person who is good at saying things indirectly, and I am done with things left unsaid." He was very still. "When I came up here," she said, "I was looking for work. That was true. And I was grateful for the work, and I would have stayed for the work, and the work would have been enough." She paused. But somewhere in the last 6 weeks, while I was not paying attention to it, or perhaps while I was paying very close attention to everything else, I stopped staying because of the work. Evelyn. Let me finish. He waited. I stayed because of you, she said. Because you listened to me when no one else would. Because you stood beside me, not in front of me, not behind me, beside me, which is something I did not know I needed until you did it. Because you never once looked at me the way the people in Red Hollow looked at me. Because when Dawes offered me my name back in exchange for leaving, there was never, not for 1 second, an actual question about whether I would take it. She held his gaze. Because leaving would have meant leaving you, and I was not willing to do that. The evening was quiet around them. Caleb looked at her for a long time. Then he said, I hired you because I needed someone for the accounts. I know. I figured out on about the 3rd day that you were the most capable person I had met in 10 years. You never said so. I didn't know how to, he said. I don't have a great deal of practice saying the things that matter to me. I have practice not saying them because the people I said them to are gone. He looked down at May and then back at her. But I have been thinking about what I want to say to you since the night you sat at the kitchen table and told me you had been afraid every day for 3 months and just hadn't let it stop you. She waited. I think, Caleb said with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing each word as if it cost something, that the only thing that has felt right in 12 years since I lost Daniel and Clara is this ranch. And I think the only thing that has felt right since you came up that trail is you being here. He paused. I don't want you to stay because you need a job. I want you to stay because you want to be here, with me. Another pause. If that's something you want. The light was going gold behind the peaks to the west. May pushed her head against Evelyn's hand. That, Evelyn said, is something I want. He reached out and took her hand properly, this time deliberately, his fingers closing around hers, with the intention of someone who had made a decision and was not making it provisionally. All right, he said. All right, she said. They walked the horses the last stretch up to the barn together, and that was all, and that was everything. In the weeks that followed, the territorial news continued to move. Richard Blackwell's land company suspended its Montana operations, while his attorneys managed the financial settlement and the ongoing scrutiny from the Gazette, which had run 2 follow-up pieces on the case and shown no signs of losing interest. Victor Hale's mining company in Denton faced a separate inquiry opened by the Territorial Attorney's Office, prompted by Evelyn's documentation of the account. Irregularities, the original irregularities, the ones she had reported 18 months ago and been destroyed for reporting. 3 former employees came forward with additional testimony once the first story broke, which was the way these things always worked. Evelyn noted without bitterness. The people who had known the truth all along waited until someone else went first. Deputy Commissioner Pierce negotiated a private settlement that kept him out of the criminal proceeding in exchange for full cooperation and testimony, which meant that the documentary record of the scheme was now supported by an insider account that corroborated everything in Evelyn's 42 pages. Samuel Reed came up the mountain the 3rd week after the Gazette story ran. He rode slowly and with the evident pain of old joints that had been asked to make a mountain journey and had agreed only under protest, and Evelyn met him in the yard and helped him down from his horse, and he stood and looked at her with those still sharp eyes and said, "Your father would have been very proud." She held herself together, mostly. "You started all of this," she said. "I pointed you up a mountain," he said. "You did the rest." She brought him inside and made coffee, and he sat at the kitchen table and told them what Red Hollow was saying, which was considerably less comfortable for the people who had turned Evelyn away than they would have liked, given that the newspaper story had made clear who she was and what she had done, and the town's collective 7 rejections now read in that light as exactly the kind of small-minded cruelty that history was not kind to in retrospect. "Mrs. Howell asked after you," Samuel said with the careful neutrality of a man who was reporting a fact without endorsing it. "Did she?" Evelyn said. "She said she hoped you were well." "I am well," Evelyn said. "Please tell her that." She did not say anything else about Mrs. Howell, or the general store owner, or the restaurant, or any of the other doors that had been closed against her, because she had arrived somewhere on the other side of needing those people to acknowledge what they had done. It would have been satisfying in a small temporary way. But she was no longer a woman who needed small and temporary satisfactions. She had something larger and more permanent, and it did not require their apology to remain real. Caleb and Samuel talked about the territory for a while, and Evelyn listened and contributed and refilled the coffee, and felt the specific ease of a person who was at home, not visiting, not performing, not waiting to see if she would be allowed to remain, but home in the full and settled sense of a place that had accepted her weight. After Samuel left, Caleb went back out to the north perimeter to continue the fence repairs. He had been working through them methodically, replacing the cut sections with new wire and resetting the weakened posts. Each repair a small and physical act of reclaiming what had been damaged. Evelyn went to the study. She sat at the desk. She opened the current ledger, the one she had been building since her first week, clean and organized, cross-referenced and accurate in a way Caleb's accounts had not been in years, and she made the entries for the week. The billings legal fees, the settlement administrative costs, the wire and supplies for the fence repairs. The credit note from the delivery finally formally entered. She worked steadily and quietly, and May lay under the desk in her permanent position, and through the window she could hear Caleb in the distance, the rhythm of his work carrying faintly on the afternoon air. Halfway through the second page she stopped. She looked at the ledger, at the handwriting that had become over 6 weeks as natural as breathing the columns. She had built the system. She had designed the record of a place being managed well by 2 people who understood what they were building. She thought about the woman who had sat by the water trough in Red Hollow with 23 cents and a broken suitcase and a piece of dry bread, pressing her hands flat on her knees to keep them from shaking, making herself a promise that the people trying to destroy her would not get her tears. She thought about the mountain trail in the dark, the split pine, the left fork, the smell of wood smoke that had reached her before she saw the house, the door opening, and a tall, quiet man looking at her worn boots and tired face, and not once, not for a single moment, looking at her as though she was less than what she was. She thought about what it meant that of all the roads she could have taken in those last desperate days, she had taken the one that led up instead of away. And that at the top of it was not just safety, but this desk, this ledger, this life that was beginning to look like the one she would have chosen if anyone had ever asked her what she wanted. No one had ever asked. She had built it anyway. She picked up her pencil. She made the last entry for the week. She closed the ledger. She went outside to where Caleb was working on the north fence, and she walked across the field in the late afternoon with May at her heels and the mountains enormous and quiet on every side. And she reached him, and he looked up, and there was that thing in his face that had been there since the night in the kitchen open, certain, unguarded, and he said nothing. Just handed her the end of the wire he was stringing so she could hold it while he secured it to the post. She held it. He worked. The fence went back up section by section, strong and straight, and properly set the way. Everything on this mountain was built not for show, not for speed, but for permanence. And that was how it went from that afternoon forward, not with declarations or ceremonies or dramatic endings, but with the daily accumulation of a life built side by 2 people who had each lost everything once and understood in a way that people who had not lost everything could never quite understand what it meant to build something and choose to stay. Evelyn Carter had come up a mountain in the dark, looking for a job. She had found something that had no line in any ledger, no entry in any account, no category in any system she had ever managed. She had found the place where she was exactly herself, not the woman they had accused, not the woman they had tried to make her into, not even the woman who had survived all of it, though she would always be that too. Just Evelyn, on a mountain in Montana, holding the wire while a quiet man rebuilt what had been broken. And that, in the end, was the truest accounting of all. Not what had been taken from her, not what she had fought to recover, but what she had found on the other side of the fight, a life that was entirely her own, built on ground that would not shift beside a man who had never once asked her to be less than she was. She had come looking for wages. She had earned a home, and she intended to keep it.